Okay. Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 41. With us is illustrator and graphic designer Ryan Tavarez of tavarezart.com, right? See?
That's it.
All right, and we're here to talk about his newest Kickstarter project, Nomads Volume 1, which has already you already reached your goals. You are now in the comfort zone, or
we're almost 200% funded.
Wow. I mean, and you still have what? I have 2 weeks left of it?
18 days.
18 days. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to ask you about, some of your Kickstarter advice and go further into that. And as I said, congratulations. This is awesome that you're able to, and this is your first Kickstarter, and you've backed 26 Kickstarters. So I think one aspect of people backing a Kickstarter is seeing that somebody's also backed a Kickstarter. So it means that they're familiar with the environment, and they're familiar with the Kickstarter culture. So it's almost like you kind of like earn some of that credentialing that you already have.
Yeah, well, and also just be part of the community, right? Just interact with it, support other creators. I think that's kind of a big part of what I enjoy doing, and especially like on social media and in Kickstarter, is just interacting with other creators, finding people who are at like a similar level or similar stage, and seeing how they're doing things, and also paying attention to their Kickstarter. Does it go well? Does it go bad? And where to go from there.
Yeah, it's a whole community. It's amazing. And it's a very supportive. And the comics community, the independent comics community, from the outside looking in, seems like it's a giant world, but it's actually, it's a pretty small world. It's like, it's easy to know somebody who knows somebody in this. And I think and I'm so happy. Like you've been involved, as we'll talk about it. You've been involved in the independent comic book scene for 10 years, really professionally for 5 years. And so I don't have to do the introduction for you and talk about your history, because I think people don't want to hear me talk. So let's hand it over to you, Ryan, and give people a little bit of a background of how you got into this, how you got into creating, because you do a lot more than comics as well. You do a lot of stuff. Printmaking, leather, all over the place. Well, give people a bit of a background on who you are.
Okay, so I guess just start from the very, very beginning. And just as a kid, just always inclined to draw, always making up my own stories, always drawing my own comics. From a just young age, just gravitated towards art classes and making things. That continued all the way into high school, where I met a lot of different people who also told stories and made stories, and we were all kind of friends. We would, during art class or other classes, we would break off and kind of come up with our own ideas. And I have one particular friend, his name's Stephen Kurbitz, who in high school he would write stories and I would draw the characters, and I would just we'd pass stuff back and forth, and he'd pass me this notebook with his script, and I would pass him my sketchbook with my drawings. And from there, I ended up going to art school. I went to the College for Creative Studies, and I went there for 2 years. And this was in the middle of the recession. And in 2008, I dropped out. I just couldn't afford to go to school anymore, and just decided to kind of try to find my own way, and potentially go back to community college or something. During that time, I ended up running into my buddy Steve again, and we ended up, getting some coffee at one of those, 24-hour diner, and we ended up just kind of hitting it off again. And like, oh man, do you still write those stories, and do you still draw, characters and stuff? And before we knew it, we started meeting up almost every other night, and at these diners, and we'd just be drinking coffee and just making stuff up and passing books around. And that was a huge part of it too, was kind of coming into, because I wasn't really reading comics through high school. It was a little bit here, a little bit there. but really finding a whole bunch of like classics and like Dark Knight Returns and Kingdom Come and a lot of these books that really kind of pushed me to look at comics in a more mature way and in a different way. And from there, it was just about trying to learn how to make them on our own. So it was like, how do you take something that you've drawn and turn it into a book? There's kind of a disconnect. And this was a little bit before YouTube was really picking up, before you could find tons of tutorials or any of that stuff. And it wasn't too long before, but we were still having to just try to track information down and just figure out how to do it. Like looking up the scripts in the backs of books and seeing how other people were writing scripts. And, we did a couple of just experiments where we wrote in paragraphs and in prose and converted that into comics. And along the way, people continue to just kind of live their life. Some people, they got married or they got, a more serious job or whatever. And, but we still kept making comics even in our spare time. And it wasn't until, and a lot of it was like shorts, really small projects that people will probably never see. It's just stuff from 2010 to 2013, 2014. It was just experimenting, trying, failing, running out of steam. We might have gotten a 10-page issue in, and then we would peter out and change our mind. Well, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to work on something else. But it was around 2013. I was doing a lot of like traveling back and forth to Chicago. My girlfriend was going to school out in Chicago, and I haven't really talked about this yet, but this is kind of like where the idea for Nomads started. And I was driving away from the city, and I was listening to some music. And that's generally how I come up with a lot of stuff, is I'll be listening to music and just imagining different scenes or things play out. And I had this idea for what would become Nomads. And it was like over these long drives, just kind of got hooked on this idea that wasn't something that I was going to drop off of. And in 2015, I basically sat down and said, I'm going to do this soup to nuts from beginning to finished book. And I'm going to get this printed. I'm going to have a printed book, and I'm going to do a con. I'm going to go to a show, and I'm going to do this for real. And at the time I actually ended up getting into IT and learning how to work on computers and stuff, and got certified. And but it was kind of like I would do that during the day, and then at night I would come home, and by this time girlfriend had came back from school, and we were living together, and we had a little apartment, and I ended up getting like this little, like, it was like this really crappy little drawing table that our neighbor found, and he knew I liked to draw, so he dropped it off. And so at night I would just be in the attic of the apartment, and I would just try to work on this project. And after it probably took me 2 or 3 months. It was the middle of the winter. By January of 2016, I had finally printed the 0 issue for Nomads, and I did my first con in that following February. And it was just kind of like one thing after another. I started meeting people. At that show, I met one of my first larger client, Three Wise Men, and we started working on a series, Motor City Mo. And it was like almost before I knew it, I was doing comics and making larger books, and just kind of 5 years later, I'm collecting Nomads and continuing to work on other books and projects and learning new things and different approaches.
So yeah, talk to us a bit about you mentioned, let me open this up here. You mentioned in a previous interview that you kind of utilized Nomads, as you kind of said, where the idea came to you. But you also kind of mentioned it's almost like an allegory of kind of like your own life in a way. Can you explain a little bit more of that? Or
yeah, so So there's two components, right? It's Nomads kind of came at a point where I was kind of lost. You know, I had been out of school for from 2008 to 2015 for 7 years, and hadn't really gone in the direction that I wanted to go in terms of what I was doing for my career. And I was trying to kind of find that thing. And so this idea of this character who's searching for something and venturing out into parts unknown. And that directly correlates with the main character, Hawk, who his family, his tribe goes missing after a botched hunt, and he has to venture out of the jungles of the Lush, this sacred, protected jungle, into this savage, brutal world for the first time. And it was kind of an expression of how I felt, kind of going from being a teenager to all of a sudden I'm an adult and trying to find my own way and kind of try to find my own tribe, my family, like the people who I wanted to be with and to work with. And
are you also following that? And it was asked earlier as well about the hero's journey. Were you familiar with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey outline before this, or is this something that you've kind of been inspired by?
So what's really cool, and again, I have to give credit to my buddy Steve. So Steve Kurbitz, he's the editor on this book, and but he's also a super close friend of mine. We've known each other for so long. And the cool thing about Steve is that he's always researching and learning. So I've always been kind of a learn by doing person. So I'm not first and foremost a writer. I'm just kind of like, I'm an artist first, and I come up with these characters and these worlds, and I go from there. And as we were trying to learn how to do all this stuff, that was definitely something that was passed back and forth, was a lot of these foundations, these archetypes for telling stories. And what's really cool about that, though, is because we all consume story, because we all enjoy listening to stories, whether you're watching a television show or watching a movie or reading a book or a comic or a video game, we all almost develop this instinctual sense of story. And even when we talk to each other, we're telling stories. Like what I'm telling you is a story in itself, and I have to think of a beginning, middle, and end, and otherwise it's a pointless story. Or think like a pointless joke. Like when someone tells a joke and it doesn't really have the parts necessary, it kind of doesn't hit. But being able to go back and actually kind of hear secondhand from my friend Steve about Joseph Campbell and all of this, and farthering that and getting into stuff like Scott McCloud and understanding comics and all of that stuff, kind of delving into that. And yeah, hey buddy. And really just thinking about, how does this apply to Hawk, and does he follow this journey, and what does that look like for him?
And so talk to us a bit more about this world that you've created, Nomads. I love this idea that, and you say, so correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to summarize what I've heard, is that this is basically Earth 2,000 years in the future. And it is and as you lovingly put it in your elevator pitch, it's basically a cross between Mad Max, Conan the Barbarian, and Terminator. And so with these kind of, this amalgamation of this, and because you kind of got the idea, as you said, driving through there, and you kind of make it the most, as you say, kind of an allegory of your own life. Has it always been specific to make it take place on Earth, or what was the thought behind that? Because you have on your Kickstarter page, you kind of have a map of the world itself. I thought it was on. Yeah, it's in here. It's on your Kickstarter, right?
Yep.
Right.
There it is.
So why?
This is just a small portion of the world.
Okay.
Of where, and it's where this story takes place. So the idea kind of stemmed from like what would happen if we did bomb ourselves back into the Stone Age, and what would that look like? And that also kind of comes from an interest in like anthropology and early civilizations, learning about like Babylonians and the native tribes who are here in the Americas. And myself, I'm Puerto Rican, and learning about the different tribes that were in the Caribbean and the way that they lived, and kind of exploring like, what if we, instead of venturing off into the future of Mad Max, where we're like clinging to technology and fighting for resources, what if we instead progressed kind of back to nature and kind of went back to living in smaller nomadic bands and tribes? And part of it is this idea, again, driving away from the city, like spending a lot of time in Chicago, feeling very crowded and wanting to retreat into kind of a more a simpler time or a simpler life, and just kind of yearning for that and wanting to tell a story in that sort of scope, and not necessarily trying to tell something that happened in the past, but let's go to a time where anything can happen. Again, 2,000 years is not a very long time, but I'm kind of fascinated with the stuff that happens with, say, like cattle when they get loose, and like within a couple of generations, they turn into like brush bulls, and they kind of, same thing with horses. When they're a domesticated animal, after so many generations, kind of reverts or goes back to kind of its roots. Same thing with like dogs and stuff. So just kind of thinking about like, what would the world look like 2,000 years later with a lot of these animals and these creatures, and what sort of niches would have to be filled without the interference of mankind? If we didn't have cities and highways everywhere, what sort of things would take place? And just kind of exploring that and playing around in that world.
There was like, did you ever see that history show After People, or have you seen that one?
Maybe.
It was funny. They basically say, okay, what happens, 10 years after People, and they kind of like they do the different themes. And I remember one just stuck out to me was information. And you talk about this with Hawk, who is from a tribe where his job is to recall all the like basically he's part of that society that has to hold information. They're the storytellers basically.
Right.
And they interviewed in this the History Channel. They talked about this guy's like, what happens to information, like everything like on discs and all this kind of stuff eventually will fade away. Paper will fade away. And the guy they're interviewing, who's he said, still after 3,000 years, we still haven't found something that lasts longer than chisel and rock. We haven't found anything that lasts longer than that still. So
well, oral tradition lasts longer. There's tribes of people to this day who they have stories and tales and family histories that are passed down through generations, and they have specific people. And it was kind of that, again, like just really loving that idea of someone honing that craft and that skill, and kind of thinking about like, okay, what would shape these new groups of people, and like what would their roles be? So you touched on Hawk and his tribe, the Hawk, and that was their role, was to preserve information. And over time, though, as a lot of the markers and things that we would recognize fade away, melt away with time, what's left is the oral tradition and your imagination. And there's a section in the story where Hawk is orating the cataclysm to Bor, but because it's been so long since anything like that has happened, the only way that they can interpret it is as gods and demons and spirits, and as these things that they don't necessarily have a physical reference for. And so it's just kind of left to what they can envision, and how they would they would interpret that.
So how much of Nomads, because as you said, this is, you do other projects, and you did mention that you would use Nomads as, this is your baby, this is your story, and you utilize this as a place where you like to experiment and kind of try new things and kind of get better at it when you work with with some of the other freelance work. Now, because Nomads is so near and dear to your heart, and this is your first Kickstarter, which is already almost 200% funded,
Mm-hmm.
how much of this, as you say, it's a bit of an allegory of kind of part of a chapter of your life, a passage through your where you are in life. How much of it also you're adding into it is any of your personal philosophies as well that you put into the story?
I mean, that's definitely going to be there, and whether it's intentional or not. So the story isn't necessarily a message on any one thing. It's a lot of different things combined, and in one sense, the relationship with Boar and Hawk and how they grow and learn to work together, being from different tribes, it's not always it's not always a gentle or smooth journey, and finding that brotherhood and coming together and learning what each other's strengths are and what each other's weaknesses are. And so you can look at it from that aspect. You can look at it from maybe a more kind of like a more natural perspective. You could look at it from, but none of those things are ever the main focus. What the main focus is currently is these two characters coming together and working together to survive in a primal world.
And so now let's talk a little bit more about you created the world. You have this world. You say it's bigger than the actual map on there. So and I don't remember if you said this or if I'm making this up. There's going to be you have the next story arc is going to be the freeze, and you have. Is it going to be 5? Did I hear there's 5, or did I hear about? No, it was from another thing. How many chapters? How many arcs are you going to have before you feel this is the final? This is an all-encompass story.
So the plan right now is to complete Hawk's story. So what I'm focusing on is the story of Hawk and his journey through this land, and he's kind of acting as your eyes, like he's kind of the Frodo leaving the Shire, and introducing readers to this world and to what some of the tribes look like. So Hawk's story is right now, I have it planned out over 3 volumes. So this is volume 1. The freeze will be volume 2. And then there's a 3rd volume that concludes this story. And the way that it's written is that there are, so the first volume is a little special. It's technically going to be 4 issues combined, or I guess 4 chapters, you could say, combined into 1 volume. And then the next 2 books are 3 chapters or 3 comic book issues combined. So with each one kind of finishing off with like a double-sized issue. And the reason that it was written this way is because there was a point in time where I was trying to make single issues or serial issues, but just kind of as a solo creator, it's kind of difficult to try to stock and maintain, 12 or 13 issues of something, making sure that you have enough for. So it just seemed like a more, I guess, reasonable way for someone like myself who's doing this all by myself to keep track of everything instead of stocking 12 different books. In the future, I'll only have to have, 3 books for people to get the whole story.
So with the Kickstarter, you did mention that it's, as we said earlier, this is your first Kickstarter, and when you got this set up, how long, and you mentioned, you said, listen, it's August. I gotta get this puppy going. I think you said that once. It's like, let me just launch it. So two questions. One, did you think it was going to be this successful this quickly? And two, which seems like a question is like, so what, even though it's successful, what would you do? What are you going to do differently? Or is there anything you would do differently for your next Kickstarter?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the first part. No, I wasn't. I was very surprised at how well it did initially. We funded within the first 3 hours, and I kind of just with level expectations, I planned for a longer campaign. So I went for 45 days, expecting that it would probably take that long to try to drum up enough attention or drum up enough enthusiasm to fund for like a story that nobody's ever heard of or read, or and in trying to drum up that attention for a volume. So volume one, one of the things that I've noticed on Kickstarter is that your buy-in or your lowest tier is very important. And so because it's a volume, because it's a graphic novel, the buy-in's a little bit higher. And that can kind of be somewhat prohibitive for people who they want to have a physical copy. They don't want digital. So I do have a digital tier on there that's $10, and people can get the first 4 issues. But beyond that, a lot of people seem to want to have a physical copy. So unfortunately, with Nomads, I can't do that. I just, because it would take me forever to kickstart all 12 issues. And I just want to I want to get this story out. I've been working on it for 5 years now, writing it and refining it and getting it to where it is now. And, I want to tell this story. But for other projects, length is something I'm going to think about. And definitely the kind of what those costs are. And making sure that it is accessible for people. I've been seeing lots of other campaigns that are doing very, very well. And, they're first-time properties. And, so it's definitely something to look at. Look at my surroundings, like who else is launching at that time and what are they doing? But I'm so happy with the way that this campaign has gone, that I'm probably going to be doing a lot of the same for the next 2 volumes, and also making sure that the previous volumes are available for those who may not have been able to back on this one. One of the things that was unpredictable was the kind of the state of the world. I understand, like right now, just with COVID and just the times that it is, it can be it's kind of difficult for people. So, I just wanted to go for it, and hopefully next time it comes at a better time. It's kind of weird to try to launch something like this in the middle of kind of the way that everything is, but I don't know.
Well, it's have you heard of the lipstick theory? It's actually what it is. Have you heard this before?
No.
Well, so what it was during the Great Depression back in the 1920s. Is larger things weren't being purchased, but lipstick sales were going through the roof, and it's because it's a low-cost luxury good that people will buy to make themselves feel better. And we're seeing this, I think, with comic books. It's a low-cost luxury good that will make people want to read a story like this, that can take them to another place. And plus, it's because what I love about your Kickstarter, you basically say, this is what it's going for. This is where the money is. This is what I'm paying for. And as I say, it's people can actually see that it's already done. So they know it's a pretty good property. So
correction, I have about 12 pages left.
Oh, okay.
So I'm wrapping up the tail end of it. When it launched, I was about 80% done, and I've just been pushing ahead. So we're getting close to 120 pages worth of story on this project. And and that's the thing too, is I understand that some people have been burnt. One of the strengths I would say is that because I am the sole person on this project, is there's not really any room for like a team breakdown or anything like that. I'm not going to mention any projects or names, but sometimes when you get into some of these projects with a lot of different creators, there can be disagreements, there can be rights issues, but there's none of that here. It's just myself and just working on this labor of love and just kind of, trying to tell this story.
Right. And so you put this so it's always we're going to do this in color. When you actually were working on your breakdown of the costs, did it ever come to you about thinking about ever doing it as a black and white, or you always were wanted to invest in the color?
That's an awesome question. So part of that is it's my experimental story. So if I'm working on, if I take a commission or a gig and someone commissions me to do work, I kind of have to pick a style and stick with it. I have to pick a technique and stick with it. I like to experiment. I like to try different mediums. I've done stuff traditionally and digitally. I've played around with stuff that is like watercolor and colored pencil and marker, and I've done flat colors, and I've done texture and all sorts of different brushes. And I like to play around with different stuff. And what ends up kind of happening sometimes is that it has this effect of like, and for better or for worse, you might be in one situation, and the story might need to be told a certain way. So there might be a certain tone or a certain level of ink or a certain type of inking. And then you get into another tone, and then it's almost like as if a different artist were working on it. And it wouldn't be appropriate to do that on someone else's story, someone who's commissioning you. So Nomads has been that kind of test bed for me. So between different chapters, as I learned new techniques, or as I got a little bit more knowledge on what I was doing with, say, like Photoshop, it kind of evolves a little bit. And so Nomads was always going to be in color because it was the way for me to learn how to color digitally. Mm-hmm. The first one, issue 0, those first 13 pages I didn't even ink them. They were done in pencil. And the plan was to learn how to ink digitally, but I ended up keeping the pencils and coloring them. So yeah, so those pages there, that's not ink. That's me just learning how to color. And it was kind of, I've since gone back and cleaned up those pages and, enhanced them a little bit with what I can do now. But it was about me experimenting. So this particular book was just never going to be in black and white. That being said, one of the things that I've noticed is that because I'm doing everything, I'm the bottleneck. If I had a full day uninterrupted, I could probably get 2 pages done from pencils to color and lettered. But that's not always possible. Yeah, I have a day job. I have other projects that I have to work on. And so moving forward, I would like to kind of experiment and go more into black and white. And that way I can get more ideas out rather than just holding them all and just wanting to get to them, but not being able to.
Now, so since we're talking about format, so one of the beautiful things about this book is that and this is what if you mentioned before, being this, you are the entire team. You are the artist, you're the writer, you're the layout, you're the letterer. So
the only thing I'm not is the editor.
You're the only thing you're not, and what I think is perfect, because you can't. And this is what a lot of people. It's like you can't be your own editor. You need to find somebody else to look at that. Everybody needs a Steve. Everybody needs a Steve. I think that's important. That if you're serious about doing this, you find your own Steve. This Steve's already taken. So, and so one of the things is like, how did you, how deliberate were you, or like when? Just want to pull up that image again. Like looking at this is like, is that handwritten font, or that's a font you used, and also how you box that in there. Talk to us a bit about just that design of just how you made how you made your boxes, and also just even like this here too. Talk to us a bit about the fonts here. Is that handwritten, or is that a proprietary font that you were able to find? Things like that.
So the sound effects are digitally drawn. So actually, if you scroll down a little bit, like you'll see like that scoof,
Right.
that wham, that big red bold wham,
right,
snap, all that. So those are hand drawn, but digitally. So I use a tablet for those. For the lettering, I'm using a font. Because my hand lettering is pretty poor, and not for nothing, on certain projects it can look good, but for this particular project it just didn't fit. The word bubbles are drawn digitally. I'm not using any sort of vector tool for those. I wanted more kind of like rougher edges, and the same thing with the narration boxes, so like the scrolls and stuff. And part of that was just kind of like, I wanted to kind of set this tone. Not that it was like in stone, but maybe it was on parchment, or maybe it's a story that was recorded, possibly by Hawk, telling his own tale. It's kind of trying to set the tone, and the same thing with a lot of the sound effects. So that's kind of why they look crude, why they are rough, why they are kind of scratchy. And just really, because I think about like lettering as being a part of the whole, and it took me a while to kind of come to that. There was a point in time where I just wanted to be a penciler, and all I wanted to do was pencils. But I found that it's kind of like one of those things, like if you want something done a certain way, you got to do it yourself. But also I just kind of like, I wanted to learn each part of that process. And along the way, lettering was one of those things. And it took me the longest to learn how to letter. I could already draw when I started making comics. I could already pencil, and I could already kind of ink, but I couldn't color, or I couldn't letter the way that I wanted to, the way that I was seeing. And I still can't color or letter the way that I want to. It's still an evolving process. I still can't draw the way that I want to. It's always like trying to get to the next step or get to the next level and kind of hone those skills. And lettering in particular, I think it's one of those invisible arts where if it's done bad, it like sticks you in the eye and it hurts. You don't like to read it. And you notice it almost immediately when text is unreadable or illegible. It because it's something that we're so used to doing, it's almost automatic. And so when it's bad, it's bad. So it was something that I thought about, but also thinking about like, how do I incorporate this into the art itself? Like, how do I incorporate it into the page? Not just stick a word bubble over top of the art, but how do I make it part of it?
And so, as you say, it's so important to make sure the letters match the font matches the feel of the book and feel of the story. Now, talking about the story, how much from the first incarnation that you did, the ideas you had in that car ride, to where it is now in this Kickstarter, how much has this changed? Was there any characters that you just had to pull out? Was there any scenes that maybe Steve said, get rid of it, drags on? How much of this looks different than your original vision?
It looks totally different. So it's probably still up. I never took it down. There's a webcomic that's up there from 2012, I believe, where I did a little short webcomic, and it's very crude. It looks really bad. and I did it. It's all digital. So I was trying to learn how to use a tablet. And like I said, this is kind of like early, like I couldn't get a display tablet. So I had like one of those like little bamboos, and I was trying to get past the eye coordination part. You know, it's like you're so used to looking at where you're drawing. If you draw, you're always looking at where your hand is. And so I was really trying to get used to that, like using a mouse to draw sort of feeling. So it looks totally different. Even some of my early sketches, like I have a sketchbook that is Hawk doesn't really look like Hawk. He kind of just looks like he has a bag over his head. Like some of it's super crude, and I definitely some stuff that I'm going to include in the volume 1. I want to do a section that has a lot of those older sketches, and even I did like a preliminary short even before everything that was just all pencil of Hawk on a boar hunt. He's hunting for his clan, and just there wasn't really even a fully formed idea there originally, because a lot of it was me just drawing and just kind of improvising. And so from that to where it is now, a lot of the characters have become actual characters rather than just cool character designs or cool concepts. And the story itself, even so, where, and again, I have to give credit to Steve, is it actually became bigger because of Steve. Mm-hmm. So it went from being kind of this one-off thing to me writing a script for the next part. And as I'm writing the script, and it's getting longer and longer and longer, and I'm peer reviewing with Steve, I'm sending it, we're looking back and forth at it. He noticed a section where Hawk and Boar are hunting, and they're trying to hunt this bull, and the hunt gets botched, and they kind of have a little bit of a squabble, like, well, like you just ran in there and you startled it, and oh, I didn't startle it, I sent them to you, I set you up for the shot and you missed. And so they're kind of having this argument, and Steve kind of pointed that out, and he said, like, this is a character moment, so you need to expand this. Like, this can't just be a single page or a montage. Like, this needs to be part of the conflict of this arc. This needs to be what this is about. Like, they need to grow as partners, and they need to learn to work together. And so there's JoJo. So we've had Alphonse and we've had JoJo, but we haven't had Ed. Ed is still sleeping, so we don't have the cat trifecta yet.
Right.
So Steve has been integral in just kind of helping to expand those plots, and kind of helping me. It has helped me form those characters into characters with motivations, and help me expand it, rather than it just being kind of like a proof of concept or a one-off short that's kind of cool. It's turned into this epic, and it's just been going from there. And originally it was just Nomads originally was just going to be a series of shorts in this world. It was about building a world and just telling single one-off events. And it's kind of turned into a story now.
So talk to us about, masks. All the characters wear masks, and so why? I mean, it's not why as in like why, like what? This is so cool. Like why? It's like, and it's almost like it's important. It's there's a lot. All types of cultures deal with masks as symbolism. There's symbols behind masks. There's power behind masks. So when you started the Nomads, did you have to then? Do you have like a timeline in place of like going backwards? Like, this is where we are. This is where the story takes place now. Do you actually have it all kind of, you and Steve have it all written out of like from this point back 2,000 years and that point to forward as well? And without giving away anything, like what's the importance that you see as, what's the importance for you as a writer of why putting in, or a creator of this, why the masks are, and what do you hope that the reader gets out of
Mm-hmm.
the masks?
Okay, so to kind of start with that, the masks are the masks are a representation of where they're from. So when venturing out into the world, the mask is used as a way to kind of state where this person is from or who they are. Even their names, Hawk and Boar, might sound generic, and that's because they are. Because they are from two different tribes, they only recognize each other as Hawk and as Boar. Names are something that's almost it's personal to the point of being sacred. Like you only share that with your family. So only your family knows your actual name. Even certain members of the same tribe only address each other as Hawk. And this goes on even to like their masks and who they reveal themselves to is very important. You'll notice actually in some of these panels, only half of a face is shown. So it's considered improper to take your mask off fully in front of people. So like Hawk has his mask rolled up and Boar has the bottom half of his mask taken off while they're sharing a meal over a fire. And even still, they don't know each other's actual names. And so this is just kind of thinking about coming up with ideas and ways that these cultures interact with each other and how they portray themselves. There was, there's even the languages that they speak. So when the reader is reading the book, we can understand a good portion of it. We can understand a majority of it. I've written it in English, but that's not because they're speaking English. That's because they're speaking a language that you and I can understand. They're speaking a common dialect. And you'll notice that some characters will speak differently. There's weird syntax for Boar. Sometimes he can be a little more blunt with his words. Hawk, who tends to be more quiet and on the stoic side currently, he speaks a little more eloquently. But then you have the third aspect, the third character in the story, and his name is Thresh. And he's speaking a totally different language. And he's speaking a language that even Hawk doesn't understand.
Huh.
And even us as the reader, we don't understand. He's speaking a language that I've come up with called Ratif, which is like a hunting language. This tribe of man-eaters, they use it amongst themselves. It's their own invented weird language. And there's some elements pulled from other languages. And I kind of lean more into like the romance languages with that. So like French and Spanish, and using some of those, the way that they modify their words. And there's a little bit that you can recognize in there and kind of piece it together. I didn't want it to be totally foreign. So even just thinking about the way that they speak languages to each other, the reason why Hawk and Boar can understand each other is because their tribes, the Hawk and the Boar, have had a relationship, so they speak a common dialect. But there is a language that the Hawk can speak, and there is a language that the Boar speak. But when they're together, they're speaking the same language.
And that's so cool. So because we were talking about before we went on the air about just how that the dialect piece. Now, because this is, you say, the Earth, and 2,000 years is a blink of an eye from a geological perspective. Have you already drawn?
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. I said, have you drawn out like the actual entire world, like a map of the entire world already?
So not the entire world, just particularly the region that we're in right now.
Right.
And I just kind of want to touch back on what you were saying about 2,000 years is a blink of an eye. But the way that I imagine it is that things have kind of accelerated over time, right? Okay. So kind of like how technology kind of doubles in speed every couple of years, and kind of, give or take your perspective, the weather patterns and how those change. A lot can happen in 2,000 years, and even in terms of like language, like the modern Italian as we know it wasn't around 600 years ago. They all spoke different variations of Latin, and Italian is a unified language, trying to make it so that like the different provinces and states could speak the same language and read the same language. So just thinking about that, and in 2,000 years, how much things can change just with humans and mankind. And, 2,000 years ago, civilization was totally different. But also, so were weather patterns. So were different areas and regions. Potentially 12,000 years ago, Egypt was a jungle, a rainforest, potentially. So there's all sorts of things that can happen. Volcanic activity, nuclear war, that can change the landscape. And I've kind of been trying to think about that as I go. And because the land itself is also a character. So for instance, in volume 1, we see one of those regions that has been transformed. And they're in the part that's released that you can see online for free on my website. They're on the way to a region called Graveler's Maw. And it is this canyon that's full of these giant amethyst crystals. Well, there's some sort of purple crystalline structures, and it looks like teeth rising out into the sky. And so the idea for that comes from when they were doing nuclear testing, it actually created like green glass out of the sand. And so thinking about that and saying, okay, well, maybe in this future, there were weapons that were detonated that created these massive chasms and created like these giant purple crystal structures, like just atomized whatever sort of sediment was there and turned it into this massive barrier, this natural formation, well, unnatural formation that kind of acts as a barrier to the land. And when you have something like that, when you have a massive, when you have a landmass like that, like say a mountain range, it can affect the region tremendously. Like it can cut off rain, it can redirect, weather patterns, just the way that the Rockies act with our weather and how it can change on either side, and just kind of building off of that. So with that in mind, I kind of, again, right now up to this point, I have just this small little chunk that's been created that I really know. And as other stories present themselves, I plan on eventually exploring other areas. One idea I've had, so you asked about a timeline, and I haven't really thought about a timeline backwards, because that's not the world that I want to explore. Like we've seen Terminator Judgment Day, right? So like, while that stuff is important, it shaped the world. I don't currently want to tell that story. And even delving more into that conflict and stuff, it's kind of already explained in a way from the character's perspective. But that being said, what I would like to do is move forward generationally in this world and kind of see what happens as these civilizations evolve, and kind of like as they grow and as they commingle. And there may be, and so for instance, like in this region that Nomads Volume 1 takes place, it's an area where people are very secluded, where people are not connected. But what about another part of the world where there's like a Silk Road 2.0, like where there is the section of like kind of almost looking back and reflecting on the Mediterranean civilizations and stuff, and how they crossed with like knowledge and technologies, and really kind of exploring that, and like, what does rediscovering technology look like, if that makes sense. Like I really like looking at early civilizations, and like even the idea of like something like the Library of Alexandria, right, containing all this knowledge and being burned and potentially setting us back, or give or take, someone was going to figure out how to do this stuff, but that pre-established knowledge was lost. And so what does that look like when we're trying to rebuild?
Right. So do you feel that are you more closely connected to Hawk or the world itself? What do you consider yourself more closely connected to?
I'm really closely connected to Boar.
Okay.
So Hawk, I mean, I'm closely connected to all of it, right? And Hawk is important in this story, and he is definitely an exploration of my own internal journey. But personally, I'm super fond of Boar and that tribe and that character of his, and like I also like, I love the world, but Boar is kind of like the brave, courageous person I wish I was, when really I'm kind of more like Hawk, or I'm like, Hawk shares more of the flaws of myself, and Boar is more of like an idealistic idea of what I wish I could be. And then it's kind of like, I think for any writer, we write a little bit of ourselves into these worlds, and there's probably a part of me that's also Thresh, that is also the villain of this arc, someone who wants to burn it down or take it over. And there's also part of me who's lost, and part of me who's a protector, and all of that. But I'm interested in seeing these characters interact in this world. And while it didn't originally start that way, while originally it was about building the world, because that was a lot of fun, it's now become about, because the world has kind of been established in my writing, and now it's about how do those characters navigate that world, and how do they change, and how do they evolve, and what does what happens to Hawk as he moves through this world, and how does it change him?
So we're at the hour mark, and it's so yeah, this was quick. So before we end, I just want to let all of our listeners and viewers know as to, please check this out. It's the Kickstarter is you got 76 backers, 18 days left to go. You're about less than 500 left to double your goal. And you have some amazing tiers, and I'll start on the bottom and go up. Is that you have 2 out of 3 left. You have so you've said in previous interviews, you know how to do leather. You can get a handmade leather bound edition, and you do all of this stuff. This isn't a team. This is you. So you're able to make a for those that are interested, Ryan will make a handmade leather bound version of the book. And you have, and one of the other things that you've gotten a lot of good, and I'm surprised that no one's picked up this yet, is that create your own nomad, where they basically design, because everybody wears masks, you get to design the mask for the character. So,
actually, if you scroll up a little bit on the images, you'll see one on the image. Yep, right there. So that is a fan created character. And he sent that to me. He just loved the world, and he has his own original character, and he basically said, I want to draw this character in Nomads. And so I took that character, his sketch, and it's going to be a feature page it's going to be a featured splash page in the book. So I have 5 slots available for this. And so rather than just do a simple cameo, I kind of thought back to some of the contests that I really liked when I was a kid, where you could like design your own monster or design your own, character and see it in the show or something. And I kind of wanted to do that. But rather than just have them show up in one panel, I want to do this awesome splash page for each character that takes place during this finale, this battle, and really pay homage to people's OCs, their own nomad.
That's true, because that's the reason why as you said earlier, it's not done yet, because you're waiting to see.
Oh yeah,
about this part.
I got to get a couple more of these guys in there.
Right, and then you have original pieces. So I have to get you back on again sometime, and maybe we'll talk about it when you do volume 2, to really talk about how you work, because you draw it out, and as you say, then you kind of you do some of the digital parts to it as well. And as you say, and then you do your own handmade screen printing. You pull your own screen prints. That's something that you do. So that is also available.
Well, just a little blurb on that. I know you're trying to wrap it up. So for those screen print posters, I'm going to do one for each volume that corresponds with that book. So each volume is going to have its own screen printed poster that kind of pays homage to the book itself.
Wow, that's odd. And so that's something, if somebody gets on that 125 level tier, they're probably going to want to do it every time as well, for every Kickstarter.
I hope.
They want to get the whole series.
Same thing with the shirts. I plan on doing different shirts for the next Kickstarter. I kind of want to make each one unique to the book, because each book is going to have its own feel.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, and there it is. Yeah, and then you have the screen print poster 50. I can see it's. Yeah, I mean, as I say, you can get the digital PDF, but everybody loves holding it in their hand. Everybody loves holding the copy in their hand. So.
Oh yeah. And I just want to say, if you missed the Kickstarter, that's okay. I plan on having it on my website for sale. And whatever extras, because I plan on printing off 100 posters, and there's going to be extras. So if you can't quite do it right now, you can potentially snag one in the future.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Ryan. This has been fantastic. And as I say, I wasn't able to ask all my questions. I still had some things I wasn't able to check off yet. So it goes quick. So
we'll do a part 2.
Yeah, and like I said, congratulations. I mean, this is exciting that your first Kickstarter, and you've already you're going to be knocking at 200%. Great stuff. And for people who love good stories, and it's and you mentioned before, it's PG-13. It's not rated R. It's good, as you say. You mentioned maybe for high school kids, 13 and up, as well. So even though it does lend homage to these these very adult themed things of like Mad Max and Conan, but it really is it's very readable, it's fun, it's a journey, and I love you kind of get people immersed into it, and you have some great tier rewards where people can have the t-shirts, the posters, and also some of the other things as well. So thanks again, Ryan. This has been so fun talking with you, and let's talk again.
Thank you very much. It's been a blast.